Hello everybody, this is International Master Jesse Kraai, and today I would like to look at a seminal game in terms of the development of a particular concept in chess which is now very widely used, but at the time was very new, and that is the exchange sacrifice. Now, this is a very classic game and it's been covered many times in written form, and what I'm hoping to do in this lecture is to talk about some of the things in this game that will hopefully make it more understandable. It's my contention, I've said this before, that here at Chess Lecture, because we're doing something orally, we can talk about ideas in a different way than we can in written form. And one way I think that's particularly true is that in books we usually talk about variations. So when I first saw this game, the way I tested it in terms of whether it was real for me as a kid when I first looked at this game was whether or not it worked in terms of variations. But we'll see, I think the better way to talk about this game is to talk about it in terms of the concepts used and not so much in terms of variations. And I think we can do that better orally. So I'm covering a game that's been covered many times before, but I hope I can make it a little bit more understandable. Okay, so the game is Petrosian 1953, and this is in Bronstein's classic book of Zurich 1953, and Reshevsky, playing white, was at that time one of the main contenders for the crown, and at that point was definitely America's best hope, and this was probably the apex really of his career to win the tournament, so this was also very important for him. Okay, let's take a look. I'm going to talk a little bit about the opening, because I think when we understand some of the ideas in the opening, we'll be able to get a grasp of what the exchange sacrifice is trying to do later. So this is the E3 Nimzo Indian that was very popular back then. It's still played today. And really what I want you to focus on is the fact that this bishop on C1 already is a little bit poor. And that's going to be White's problem piece, and it's really going to be the thing that Petrosian's going to concentrate on for the rest of the game. Okay, let's take a look. Castles, knight f3, c5, and castles. And this is a position that's been reached just thousands of times, and there's been a variety of approaches for black. One of the main reasons I think that this variation isn't as popular today is that what people do now is they'll just take on c4 and play knight d7. And then if white plays a3 like in the game, we'll just take and play b6. And you'll notice now the bishop comes easily to b7, and it's very hard to talk about white having an advantage here. Not only are all of black's pieces beautiful, but this bishop on c1 is still going to have problems becoming an effective piece. Okay. So, in any case, Petrosian plays knight c6, which is still played today. It's still a totally viable move, and we get this move a3. And here it might be a time to talk a little bit about what white's trying to do. So white is a little bit down in development, and he still has this problem bishop on c1, but he really has long-range goals. And the easiest way to understand that is simply that he has an extra pawn in the center, for one, and two, he has the two bishops. And at the moment, that doesn't really mean anything, but what white's really dreaming of is the potential power of his pieces exploding into the center in particular. So it's like white has a potential dream that he's trying to accomplish, and black has to try to stop that. Now, probably the most common variation here is this thing that goes takes, and then queen c7, in which case black is going to aim for e5 to let his bishop come out. But really, back in the 50s here, this was still all being tried out, and Petrosian plays this move b6, which, although I don't think it's the best move, I think it actually, the fact that it works in this game, which proves a little bit of the reliability of the black position here. That is to say, with his bishop on c1, it's really going to be hard for white to get an advantage. Now the point of b6 is that we're going to force white to decide things immediately because we're going to be threatening bishop a6. And when we look at it, these pawns here are more or less static. These guys could go at any time. So what that means is that bishop on d3 is really white's key piece. And this is also going to be key to understanding the exchange sacrifice. That bishop on d3 is white's best piece, and we want to get rid of it. And so right away we're threatening bishop a6, which would lead inevitably to the exchange of that piece. And so white does something he probably was interested in doing anyway. That is, he takes the pawn. So now the situation's clarified in the center where white has the extra pawn, but now this bishop is out. Okay, and here Reshevsky plays a move that I'm not entirely thrilled about, bishop b2. Now it has to be said, while we're dealing with some big ideas in this game, one of the exchange sacrifices is later going to come. But the other one is the fact that Botvinnik played this type of setup many, many times, and that what I'm sure was in Reshevsky's mind when he played bishop b2 was Botvinnik's win against Capablanca in 1938. And there what Botvinnik proved is that this bishop really isn't so bad. For one, it has the option of getting out in either of these ways, and that's what it's really dreaming to do. And the second is that if white now plays, or black now plays c4 to lock it in, then what will happen is this pawn, which was on c5, really isn't exerting any central influence on anymore, and then white will really be playing for e4, which we're going to all see in this game. So bishop b2 has some very deep ideas in it, but to my mind, probably the best way for white to play is just to take and play c4, just in the spirit of opening up the position for the white bishops, though I really don't feel that black's in any significant danger here. But probably a little bit better for white. So let's take a look at how Petrosian responds. Bishop b2, and now he plays c4. So it's very interesting is that already now the plans of the game are a little bit solidified with this committal move. The bishop on b2 is now going to have trouble getting out, but at the same time, white's going to have some clear plans of advancing in the center. And really it's going to be black's job to try to blockade on the light squares. So the key squares are e4, d5, c4. We're going to see all of those squares as critical to holding white back. If black can hold white back on the light squares, then it's going to be hard for this bishop to become activated. Okay, so let's take a look. Bishop g4 was played, and now a very nice move by Reshevsky. Reshevsky just sidesteps the thing with queen e1, not being afraid of black doubling the pawns like this. If he were to do so, then what's going to happen is not only the two bishops aren't that important here because the bishop on b2 is still bad, but it's going to be very hard for black to actually do anything given white's huge central control. And white can take his time, maybe with moves like f4, f3, bringing the queen out, putting the king here. He's going to be in no rush. Nevertheless, I think a lot of players would have taken on f3 simply because they're afraid of the plan that white's about to execute, namely to bring the knight back, to play f3, to play e4, all of which happens in this game, and somehow Petrosian isn't scared about it, and that's one of the interesting things. Let's play a couple more moves and I'll talk more about that. Knight e4, very interesting move. So he's realizing that the knight has to come to d2, at which point we can trade it off. Okay. The other point is that white really can't trade off this guy at all. Then we'll have the complete lock on the white squares, and more importantly, we'll have gotten rid of his best piece. So one of the things I think is behind this move, knight e4, is white's going to play knight e2, which he does, and we take. And one of the points is is that the more pieces we trade off that are not this bishop, the better it is going to be for us. Okay, so it's like we're trying to accentuate the problem of the bishop on b2 by trading off all his friends. You know, it's like if you were in some huge fight and you were trading off all the strong guys and you were leaving the weakling behind, trying to leave him for last. And that's what really Petrosian's strategy is here. And we'll see now that already you can imagine him playing the game. He hasn't foreseen the exchange sacrifice, but what he's really thinking of at this point is getting rid of this bishop at all costs, really. And his next move aims for that. Bishop h5. So he's threatening bishop g6 to trade it off. f3, bishop g6, e4. Now, one thing that's interesting about this game is, to many eyes, it would seem that black's already in big trouble here. It seems like white's pawns are advancing, and it's not clear really what black is doing, and it just looks bad. And so one of the things about this position that's interesting is that Petrosian really isn't fearing the position that much. And I want to read a quote from Bronstein. This is an excellent book, The Zurich 1953. And Bronstein recently died, and at some point we're going to have to do a tribute to him. One of the most creative players, and really one of the most insightful writers as well. And I'm going to read a paragraph that he writes about, right around this point, about the way Petrosian's thinking about the position, which I think is important. And I'm sure as a kid when I read this, I didn't understand why it was important. So he writes, Petrosian continues following his own line, figuring that as long as he has made no unsound moves, nor upset the positional balance, he will not risk finding himself in a losing position. And that's very interesting, because here I would have huge amounts of fear in terms of this advancing pawns. But what Bronstein's really saying about Petrosian is something I'm sure they spoke about, and that is something that I consider critical to the whole Armenian way of thinking. And you hear almost all Armenians will talk in this similar way when they talk about defensive positions. And that is that if you do nothing wrong, you should always have resources. And so from this perspective, even though it looks bad, we haven't done anything wrong, and we still have this horrible bishop to prey upon. So really it shouldn't be all that bad for us. And so the initial impression that white's doing really great here is a little bit misleading. In fact, black is probably just totally okay. And Petrosian shows us how it's done in this game. So first he plays queen d7, and white plays the natural rook a e1. And now we get a move that seems suicidal, but we'll see it makes sense. He takes. Pawn takes. It looks suicidal because now these guys look gorgeous. This rook on f1 is now free. But we'll see that Petrosian really has a plan here. And that is, beginning with his next move, what he would like to do is put pressure on this pawn on e4. And what he would like to do is to force that pawn to commit. And that's basically one of Nimzovich's key rules, is that if you have a pawn duo in the center that's controlling all kinds of beautiful squares, what you would like to do is force it to commit, and then once he commits, then our pieces will gain squares. For example, if this pawn advances to d5, our knight can go to e5, and really in this game we're looking for him to push to e5, and then we'll get the square d5. So a bunch of arrows, but the main point is we want to force the pawn to commit. Okay, so let's take a look. Reshevsky now plays queen f4. An instructional variation here is a4, after which black has this nice move knight e5. Okay, and the point is we'll just stick this knight on d3 next move no matter what. And if white takes it, not only is this pawn going to be loose, but we'll have gotten rid of the best piece of white's, and then it's actually going to be white who will be in trouble, because our bishop on g6 will be so much stronger than the bishop on b2. So, white plays queen f4. b5. So he's solidifying on the queen side, building on the queen side, and making it harder for white to play a4. Nevertheless, a4 might have been an interesting move for white to try. The problem is that we can play some kind of move like rook b8, and it's not so easy to figure out what we're going to do with the problem piece. For example, if you play bishop a3, then we have a move like b4, and that's, by hitting this pawn, is going to shatter the center. Okay. So, bishop d1. So he wants to bring the bishop around and now have the option of advancing the pawn without trading off his key piece. Rook e7, bishop g4, queen e8. So now we're really putting pressure upon the e4 pawn, and white is now forced to move the thing. e5. Okay, so now we've really accomplished a goal, and what black is thinking of now is the blockade on the light squares. And that's going to be key to the whole idea now of the exchange sacrifice. So, like I said, it's kind of an organically evolving idea that must have been happening for Petrosian, where this bishop is bad, and we're going to be looking to trade this guy off and blockade these squares d5 and e6. So, we get a5, rook e3, rook d8, touching this square, and also at some point we're going to be looking to play b4 to undermine d4. And now rook fe1. So here's where the idea itself happens, but like I said, I really think it's been building for some time. And this is where Petrosian plays rook e6. So the point is, white's really threatening to play e6. So the first thing that rook e6 does is it stops that. And the next thing it does is it frees the knight from go to e7 to d5. And like I said, in this position, black wants to blockade on the light squares. And really, throughout the entire game, we've been seeing that black wants to exchange blockade on the light squares. So what happens when white takes on e6 is that he loses his best piece, the bishop on g4. All his pawns are on dark squares, and that bishop on g4 is a light squared kind of guardian of the other squares around it, so that's his best piece. And unfortunately at this point, it's hard to imagine white being able to do anything else. And so here I want to take a moment and talk a little bit about the concept here that's being developed and is now very prevalent in modern play. So the first thing to notice is what we've talked about, is that really what black is getting for the rook is not some kind of immediate attack, but he's getting white's best piece. And because he's getting white's best piece, he's also going to be afflicting this guy, bishop b2. And the other thing we're gaining is we're gaining complete control over d5, because when white takes, we're going to take back with this pawn. And so now we have a huge grip that really white will never be able to bust on the light squares. Okay. But I want to talk about what I would call the two conceptual hurdles to making an exchange sacrifice. And these hurdles would have had to have been overcome for this idea to really have been born. And I think in your own games, one still has to go to overcome these hurdles. Now, let's say that you've understood all of these things about the quality of that bishop on g4 and how it's actually in many ways a better piece than e6. And you've seen all these concepts of the knight going to e7 and d5. In a way, what happens then is it's like you're falling in love with the idea. You're becoming infatuated with the idea. But the problem is in chess, we actually have to commit. It's not just like when we're analyzing and we can take it back. In chess, once you make the move, it's like you're marrying the move. Okay? And so the way I would think about this idea is to say it's kind of like a young man falling in love. He sees this beautiful idea, and he's thinking about committing himself to it, and in a way it's like marriage. Once you make the move, it's done forever. Now, the way to think about it really is this knight's going to be the one that's going to be fighting the rook, right? Because he's going to come to d5. And the question will be, will my knight on d5 be as good as one of white's rooks? And the curious thing about marriage, right, is that you're a young man, and you're thinking all these beautiful things about how gorgeous that knight's going to be on d5. But in a lot of ways, you have to be worried about what's called in literature the malignant prophecy. Right? Because you see now the woman in her full beauty coming to d5, but you're thinking, oh, but what about her mom? What does her mom look like? And her mom was just a knight. And that rook, you know, it can become a very scary piece in the long run. So even if you get your knight to d5, you could say, well, yeah, it looks great then. But what about many, many moons from now? What will the wrinkles of time do to my poor knight? And you can look at the mother, and she could be like a malignant prophecy. You could say, oh my God, someday all of those pawns are going to come off, and it's just going to be my stupid knight against this powerful rook. And that's really the second problem that you have to deal with the exchange sacrifice. Because you have to be able to feel that in the long run, your knight is going to be just as strong or stronger than that rook. And that's the scary thing, because this position will change just as the young love will change. And you have to have an appreciation of how that change is going to be affected. Sometimes it's not so great, to tell you the truth. If the pawns come off the board, that rook will come back to menace us. Okay, let's take a look at how the game went. By the way, I want to say something about this decision, rook e6. I'm one of the people that got really upset that Kramnik lost to the computer. Some people don't care at all. But I just want to say in this instance that the computer finds that white's before rook e6 is basically winning, and it does not see rook e6 at all. I left it on Fritz 9 for a while. It's the 13th move. Okay, so that means Fritz thinks there's 13 other moves, or 12 other moves that black could make that are actually better than rook e6. And all those other moves he thinks white's winning. Because once white does get in the move e5, e6, it's very dangerous for black. So, in a way, you know, this whole thing with the computer being the champion is really hard for me to deal with, because it's almost as if you have someone like Beethoven, and he has to prostrate himself down before someone or something that doesn't understand what a chord is. You know, this very simple idea, simple and beautiful idea of the exchange sacrifice. In any case, let's continue and see how things went. I just want to say, a lot of commentators from this point on have said this was a defensive maneuver, that black was in trouble, and that was also my first take on this position. I don't think so at all, that anymore. I think that now it's white who's in trouble, and white's the one now who has to play for the draw, and that's exactly what happens here. Reshevsky plays very well to earn the draw from this position. Otherwise, I think it's very dangerous. One thing that Bronstein says that I don't agree with in this position is that really white should be considering playing something like h4 and h5 and not even take the rook at first. But it doesn't make any sense to me. After knight e7, we're threatening knight d5. h5, we can just meet with some move to d3 or c2. Black's doing beautifully. Okay, so let's take a look at how Reshevsky defended this position. First thing he did was play a4. Good move. So before he takes the rook, where there's really no hurry to do it, he's going to try to break up these pawns. And really, if black is able to play b4 at some point, he's going to be doing quite well. Unfortunately, now if d4, then white could play d5, and then it's black who's in trouble. For example, rook takes, and we gain this pawn. So, black plays knight e7, to which white must immediately respond because of the threat of knight d5 forking the pieces. So Reshevsky plays a very nice move, queen f1. So what this will do is prevent black from playing b4 due to the weakness of this pawn on c4. Knight d5, and we kind of have the sense of where things have landed. Let me take that all back. Before queen f1, Reshevsky threw in bishop takes, and now queen f1 with the same idea. Knight d5, rook f3. Okay. Now, problematic here for black is if he could just play this move b4, he would be better. But unfortunately, it's just not going to pan out. And for example, if you play something like queen c6, aiming to play b4, you'll find yourself in a little bit of trouble, because after pawn takes, queen takes, bishop a3, this bishop is doing something very important all of a sudden. He's threatening the rook coming to f8, and now this is really the horror for black if somehow that bishop were able to get loose. So, that's not possible, and he plays bishop d3. By the way, I think black could also get a perfectly reasonable game by playing something like b4, queen takes, and queen takes pawn. Not to say that what Petrosian did was wrong, just to point out that the position is very solid here for black. He has more than one way of playing the position. So, as it was, he played bishop d3. Excuse me. Bishop d3. And now Reshevsky realizes the danger he's in and simply takes the bishop off the board. And that's the right decision. If you move the queen anywhere and we get in b4, black is clearly winning. Those pawns are going to roll, and there's no reason to think that white's rooks are any better than black's minor pieces. So like I said, I really think Reshevsky's playing for the draw here. Rook takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and now we have to play b4. And here, some commentators have thought that maybe white could play for something with c4. I think that would actually be a mistake. I think black's better after knight b6. The only way I think I could justify playing c4 is if we could somehow get this bishop loose in the long diagonal like this. d5, pawn takes e6. And at first, that's definitely something for white to consider, but the problem is if we just take and the queen moves, I don't know, say e3 or d4, or not d4, but e3, then we'll just play c3, and the bishop's completely shut down, and black's doing fine. And if we don't do anything like that, then there's very nice pressure on the center, and we're threatening knight takes a4. And the other thing I'm pretty certain of, just having studied Reshevsky a little bit, he was always in time pressure. So it's not surprising at all that here he took what really is the only way out for the draw. So he's basically admitting now that he's not going to be able to win this position. The game continued like this. a5, k8, c6, bishop c1. And here, Petrosian could have gone on a little adventure with rook a5, but he knows what his position's worth. Right? There's no reason to push things. He's already a little bit better. Queen c7, a6, queen b6, queen c4. Now he just is going to improve the position. Excuse me. Bishop d2 first. Just going to improve the position. b3, queen c4, h6, h3, no rush. b2, b1, king h8, bishop e1. And now here the game was adjourned, and it was agreed as a draw. Unfortunately for black, he really can't get away with taking this pawn, because then white has queen c8 and queen c2 check, picking up this pawn. After which, really, he should still also be fine, but there's no reason to do that to himself. And let's just take a look at this position for a second. Notice that even though the exchange has been given back by white, we still retain the character of the position of the very strong knight on d5 versus the poor bishop on e1. And that's one of the nice things that the game finished here was, even though black didn't win, we're still fulfilling a plan that started long before the sacrifice of the exchange. And notice that that bishop on e1, it's kind of out now, and that's a good thing for white. But because the pawns are on d4 and e5 on dark squares, this is kind of like building a cage for his own bishop, so the bishop doesn't have full movement. If white had, on the other hand, a light square bishop, he would be clearly better in this position. So, I'm interested what you guys think about this lecture, whether it's possible to talk about something that's been talked about a million times, but talk about it here at Chess Lecture and hopefully add something new to the thing. And I'll leave by saying that if you're interested in the exchange sacrifice, there's several other lectures here. One is called The Exchange Sacrifice of Personal Account, and the other is called The Practicalities of an Exchange Sacrifice. And I hope soon we'll have the classic game Botvinnik Capablanca 1938 up as well. And I'm going to try at the end of my lectures now to refer to other things at the end, so you can kind of keep going with whatever concept we're working with. So this is International Master Jesse Kraai, hoping you've enjoyed today's lecture. Bye-bye.